Maya Rodriguez pressed her face against the rain-streaked window of the social worker's car, watching the towering iron gates of Eastbrook Academy grow larger. She clutched her backpack tighter, feeling the weight of everything she owned inside it. At 14 years old, she had learned not to get excited about new places. Foster homes came and went like seasons, each one promising stability but delivering disappointment. The car rolled up the circular driveway, and Maya's eyes widened despite herself. The school looked like something from a movie, with stone buildings covered in ivy and students walking around in pressed uniforms. Her social worker, Mrs. Chen, smiled warmly and patted her shoulder. The scholarship letter had arrived 3 months ago, offering a full ride to one of the most prestigious music academies in the country. Maya had played piano since she was 6, teaching herself on broken keyboards in community centers and church basements. As they walked through the marble entrance hall, other students stopped and stared. Maya's second-hand clothes and worn sneakers stood out against their designer outfits. She heard whispers and saw pointed fingers. Mrs. Chen led her to the administrative office where the headmaster, a stern woman named Dr. Whitmore, barely looked up from her papers. She handed Maya a schedule and a key to her dormitory room. There were no warm welcomes here, no encouraging words about her talent. Just cold efficiency. The dormitory was divided by an invisible line. Scholarship students stayed in the older West Wing while paying students enjoyed the renovated East Side. Maya's room was small and sparse with a creaky bed and a desk that wobbled when she touched it. Her roommate hadn't arrived yet, so she unpacked alone, carefully arranging her few belongings. She pulled out her most precious possession, a tattered photo of her mother at a piano recital, and placed it on the nightstand. That evening, Maya found her way to the music building. The practice rooms lined both sides of a long corridor, each one filled with beautiful instruments. She peeked through windows, watching students play grand pianos that probably cost more than every place she had ever lived combined. Her fingers itched to touch the keys. A door at the end of the hall stood open, and she stepped inside to find a modest upright piano waiting. It wasn't fancy, but it was more than she had hoped for. She sat down and began to play, losing herself in a Chopin nocturne. The worries about fitting in, the stares from other students, the loneliness that followed her everywhere all faded away. Music was the one constant in her chaotic life, the one thing nobody could take from her. She didn't notice the small crowd gathering outside the door, drawn by the sound of her playing. When she finished, applause erupted in the hallway. Maya jumped, startled to find at least a dozen students watching her. Most looked impressed, but 3 girls in the back whispered to each other with sneers on their faces. The tallest one, a blonde girl with perfectly styled hair, stepped forward. Her name was Victoria Hartwell, and she was the reigning champion of every piano competition at Eastbrook. Her family had donated an entire wing to the school. She looked Maya up and down with obvious disdain. Victoria announced loudly that the annual Eastbrook piano competition was in 3 months. She said it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, as if daring Maya to even consider participating. The competition was legendary, with judges from top music conservatories and prizes that included performance opportunities and scholarships to summer programs. Every serious piano student at Eastbrook competed, and Victoria had won for the past 2 years. Maya felt something stir inside her chest, a mixture of determination and defiance. She had spent her whole life being underestimated, being told she didn't belong, being made to feel less than, but when she sat at a piano, none of that mattered. She met Victoria's gaze steadily and said she would be entering the competition. The hallway went silent. Victoria's smile turned into something ugly, and she walked away with her friends, their laughter echoing behind them. That night, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She knew she had just made her life at Eastbrook much harder. Victoria was popular and powerful, with parents who could make things happen with a single phone call. But Maya had survived worse than mean girls at a fancy school. She had survived abandonment, neglect, and constantly being moved from place to place. If she could survive all that, she could handle whatever Victoria threw at her. The next morning, Maya received her assigned practice piano. A maintenance worker wheeled it into her practice room with an apologetic look. It was old and battered, with chipped keys and a bench that squeaked with every movement. When Maya pressed the keys, several notes stuck or didn't play at all. Others were wildly out of tune, creating discordant sounds that made her wince. She looked through the window and saw Victoria practicing on a beautiful Steinway grand piano, the kind professionals used in concert halls. Maya realized immediately what had happened. This wasn't random. Victoria or her friends had arranged for her to get the worst instrument in the entire school. It was a message, a way of putting her in her place before the competition even began. Most students would have complained to the administration or given up entirely. But Maya had learned long ago that life wasn't fair, and nobody was coming to save her. She sat down at the broken piano, rolled up her sleeves, and began to play. The first week at Eastbrook Academy tested every ounce of resilience Maya had built over 14 years of instability. Victoria and her friends, who everyone called the Trilogy, made it their personal mission to remind Maya she didn't belong. They would walk past her in the hallways and hold their noses, suggesting she smelled bad. They spread rumors that she had lice and stolen money from other students' lockers. In the cafeteria, they would save seats at their table and then laugh when Maya walked by, making sure everyone knew the seats weren't for her. But the worst part was the piano. Every day, Maya showed up to her assigned practice room and faced the instrument that seemed determined to defeat her. Middle C stuck completely, requiring her to pound it twice as hard as any other key. The F sharp in the second octave didn't work at all, forcing her to mentally fill in that note during pieces. The pedal squeaked so loudly it echoed through the hallway, announcing her presence to everyone. Some keys were so out of tune they sounded like completely different notes. Other scholarship students avoided Maya after the first week. They had their own struggles and couldn't afford to be associated with someone Victoria had targeted. Her roommate, a quiet girl named Jennifer, requested a room transfer after just 5 days. Maya understood. She had spent most of her life alone anyway. At lunch, she sat by herself in the corner, doing homework while other students laughed and socialized around her. After classes, she went straight to the practice room and stayed until the building closed at 10. Maya developed a strategy for dealing with the broken piano. She couldn't change the instrument, so she would change her approach. For passages that required the dead F sharp key, she rearranged the fingering to use other notes that created a similar harmonic effect. When keys stuck, she learned to anticipate and press them with extra force at exactly the right moment. She practiced scales hundreds of times, memorizing which keys required gentle touches and which ones needed to be hammered. The squeaky bench became a rhythm keeper. She learned to rock slightly in time with the music, using the squeak as a metronome. The out-of-tune keys forced her to listen more carefully, to understand the relationship between notes rather than just relying on perfect pitch. In a strange way, the terrible piano was making her a better musician. She was learning to adapt, to problem-solve, to make beauty out of broken things. These were skills that fancy students with perfect instruments would never develop. Victoria noticed that Maya hadn't quit. This seemed to make her even angrier. One afternoon, Maya returned to her practice room to find her sheet music shredded and scattered across the floor. Weeks of annotations and notes she had made were destroyed. She spent that entire night rewriting everything from memory. The next week, someone spread glue inside the piano's locks, forcing maintenance to spend hours cleaning it before Maya could practice. She used that time to practice fingering on a tabletop in the library. Dr. Whitmore, the headmaster, never intervened. Maya suspected that Victoria's parents, who donated generously to the school, had made it clear that their daughter should receive preferential treatment. The music teachers pretended not to notice the sabotage. Mr. Castellanos, the head of the piano department, actually seemed amused by the situation. During a group lesson, he made Maya play last on her broken piano while other students used the good instruments. When she struggled with the stuck keys, he sighed dramatically and suggested that perhaps some students simply weren't cut out for competitive piano. But Maya had one secret advantage that nobody knew about. Before foster care, before her mother's addiction destroyed their family, Maya had lived with a grandmother who was a piano technician. She had spent countless afternoons watching her grandmother repair and tune instruments. Those memories, buried under years of trauma and displacement, began to surface. Late at night, after everyone else had left the music building, Maya would sneak back into her practice room with tools she borrowed from maintenance. She couldn't do much, but she could do something. She carefully cleaned the mechanisms inside the stuck keys, removing years of accumulated dust and debris. She adjusted the hammer position slightly, improving the tone of the worst keys. She tightened loose screws in the bench to reduce the squeaking. She couldn't make the piano perfect, but she could make it better. More importantly, she learned its quirks so intimately that she could play it like an extension of herself. 6 weeks before the competition, Maya chose her piece. While other students selected popular crowd pleasers by Rachmaninoff or Liszt, she chose something unexpected: Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 14, known as the Moonlight Sonata. Specifically, she chose the third movement, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical piano repertoire. It required lightning-fast fingerwork, perfect dynamic control, and absolute precision. On a good piano, it was challenging. On her broken instrument, it seemed impossible. The trilogy found out about her choice and nearly fell over laughing. Victoria made sure to tell everyone in the music program that the foster kid was going to embarrass herself playing Beethoven. She spread rumors that Maya didn't even know how to read music properly and was just memorizing pieces by ear like a trained monkey. During a music theory class, Victoria asked the professor to explain the historical context of the Moonlight Sonata, then turned to Maya with fake sweetness and asked if she understood any of it. Maya did understand it. She had researched everything about the piece, reading about how Beethoven wrote it while going deaf, how he poured his anguish and passion into every note. She felt a connection to that struggle, to creating something beautiful despite overwhelming obstacles. But she didn't explain any of this to Victoria. She just smiled slightly and went back to her notebook. There was no point in arguing with people who had already decided you were worthless. As the weeks passed, something unexpected began to happen. A few students started stopping by her practice room door to listen. They were mostly other scholarship kids at first, drawn by curiosity about the girl who practiced on the worst piano in the school until late every night. They heard her playing the same difficult passages over and over, making tiny improvements each time. They saw her covered in dust from working on the piano's internal mechanisms. They noticed how her fingers flew across the keys despite the obstacles. Slowly, word spread that Maya Rodriguez might actually be really good. Not just good for a foster kid or good despite her circumstances, but genuinely talented. A junior named Marcus, who played violin and came from a working-class family, started sitting outside her practice room doing homework just to hear her play. A senior named Aisha, whose parents had sacrificed everything to send her to Eastbrook, brought Maya coffee one night and told her to keep going. Small acts of kindness that reminded Maya she wasn't completely alone. Victoria noticed these allies forming and escalated her campaign. She convinced her father to complain to Dr. Whitmore about the noise from Maya's squeaky piano bench, disturbing other students. The headmaster responded by moving Maya's practice time to 6 in the morning, before most students were even awake. This meant Maya had to wake up at 5, practice for 2 hours on an empty stomach, then attend a full day of classes. Most people would have broken under this schedule, but Maya had spent years waking up early in foster homes, tiptoeing around to avoid angry foster parents, making herself small and invisible. This was just another version of that survival mode. She set her alarm for 4:45 and showed up every single morning. The early practice sessions became her meditation, her therapy, her rebellion against everyone who wanted her to fail. And with each passing day as the competition drew closer, her playing grew stronger. The broken piano was no longer her enemy. It was her partner in defiance. 3 weeks before the competition, Maya's determination caught the attention of someone unexpected. Professor Elena Morrison taught advanced piano studies and had a reputation for being impossibly demanding. She had performed with major orchestras around the world before retiring to teach at Eastbrook. Most students were terrified of her sharp critiques and disappointed sighs. She rarely spoke to first-year students and never to scholarship kids. But one morning, Professor Morrison appeared in the doorway of Maya's practice room at 6:15. Maya's fingers froze on the keys. She had heard stories about Professor Morrison dismissing students from her classes for tiny mistakes. The elderly woman walked slowly into the room, her cane tapping against the floor. She sat down on a folding chair in the corner and simply said one word: continue. Maya's heart pounded as she returned to the Moonlight Sonata's third movement. She made it through the first section before hitting a passage where 3 keys stuck simultaneously, creating an awful jumbled sound. Professor Morrison held up one hand. Maya stopped playing, preparing for humiliation. Instead, the professor stood up and examined the piano closely. She pressed each key, listening carefully. Then she did something that shocked Maya. She laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but a genuine sound of surprise and respect. She asked Maya how long she had been practicing on this instrument. When Maya explained it was her assigned piano and described the modifications she had made, Professor Morrison's expression shifted to something that looked almost like admiration. The professor asked why Maya hadn't complained to the administration. Maya simply said she had learned not to expect anyone to fix problems for her. Professor Morrison nodded slowly, as if this answer confirmed something she had suspected. She told Maya that she herself had grown up poor in Romania, practicing on a piano with broken strings and missing keys in a basement that flooded every spring. She said the best musicians weren't born in perfect conditions. They were forged in difficult ones. For the next hour, Professor Morrison worked with Maya on the Beethoven piece. She didn't try to fix the piano or suggest Maya deserved better. Instead, she taught Maya how to use the piano's flaws to her advantage. She showed her how to emphasize certain notes to distract from the broken ones, how to use subtle timing changes to mask mechanical delays, how to turn technical limitations into artistic choices. It was like learning a secret language that only they understood. Before leaving, Professor Morrison made Maya an offer. She would provide private coaching sessions 3 times a week until the competition, free of charge. But there were conditions. Maya could tell no one about these lessons. She had to arrive at Professor Morrison's studio at 5 in the morning, before even the janitors showed up, and she had to promise not to quit no matter what happened. Maya agreed immediately, hardly believing this was real. The secret lessons transformed Maya's playing. Professor Morrison was brutal in her honesty, pointing out every weak transition and sloppy phrase. But she also taught Maya things that other students would never learn. She explained how to read an audience, how to build tension and release it, how to tell a story through music. She shared techniques she had learned from masters across Europe. Most importantly, she taught Maya to play with absolute confidence, to own every note as if it was exactly what she intended. Victoria noticed something had changed in Maya's playing. During a mandatory performance class where all competition participants had to play a short piece, Maya's interpretation was noticeably more sophisticated than before. Victoria approached Maya afterward with false friendliness, asking if she was getting help from someone. Maya just smiled and said she practiced a lot. That answer clearly wasn't satisfying, so Victoria decided to increase the pressure. The next form of sabotage was psychological. Victoria started a rumor that Maya was only at Eastbrook because of a diversity quota, not because of real talent. She told everyone that the scholarship committee felt sorry for the poor foster kid and lowered the standards to let her in. The trilogy spread this story through their social circles until even some teachers started repeating it. In classes, Maya would catch people whispering and looking at her with either pity or contempt. Maya felt the old familiar shame trying to creep in. The voice that said she wasn't good enough, didn't deserve good things, should just give up. But then she would remember Professor Morrison's words about being forged in difficult conditions. She would think about her mother's photo on her nightstand and all the times she had promised herself she would be better, do better, make something of the musical gift she had inherited. The rumors hurt, but they didn't stop her fingers from flying across the keys every morning. 2 weeks before the competition, Maya's practice piano finally gave up completely. The already damaged F-sharp key broke entirely, the hammer inside snapping in half. Several other keys stopped producing any sound at all. The bench collapsed, sending Maya crashing to the floor during practice. When she went to maintenance to report the problems, they said all the spare parts had been allocated to repair instruments for paying students. Her piano would have to wait until after the competition to be fixed. Maya stood in the practice room staring at the now unplayable instrument. This was it, the final move to push her out of the competition. Without a working piano, she couldn't practice. Without practice, she couldn't compete. Victoria had won. But then Maya remembered something Professor Morrison had said during their first lesson. The music isn't in the instrument, it's in you. The piano is just a tool to release what's already inside. She made a decision that everyone thought was insane. She would practice without the piano. For the next 2 weeks, she spent hours sitting at the broken instrument, playing all the notes in her mind. Her fingers moved through the motions in the air above the keys. She visualized every phrase, every dynamic change, every emotional shift. She practiced mental rehearsal, a technique used by professional musicians but rarely by students. She would close her eyes and hear the entire Moonlight Sonata third movement in her head, perfect and complete. Professor Morrison approved of this approach. In their morning sessions, she had Maya play on her studio's grand piano, but only once per session. The rest of the time they worked on visualization, on understanding the music so deeply that the physical act of playing became almost automatic. The professor explained that the brain doesn't distinguish much between real practice and vividly imagined practice. Both create the same neural pathways. Marcus and Aisha heard about the broken piano and were outraged. They wanted to report it to the competition committee or the school board. But Maya asked them not to. She explained that complaining would just make her look weak, like she was making excuses before even competing. She also suspected that with Victoria's family's influence, any complaint would be twisted to make Maya look like a troublemaker. Better to say nothing and let her playing speak for itself. The week before the competition, Dr. Whitmore called Maya into her office. The headmaster sat behind her massive desk and explained that the competition was very prestigious and that Eastbrook's reputation was at stake. She suggested in carefully chosen words that Maya might want to consider withdrawing. She said it would be less embarrassing for everyone if Maya stepped aside gracefully, rather than being eliminated in the first round. The implication was clear. You're going to fail, so save us all the trouble. Maya looked directly at Dr. Whitmore and said she would not be withdrawing. The headmaster's expression hardened. She reminded Maya that her scholarship was renewable each year, and that many factors went into renewal decisions, including whether students were a good fit for Eastbrook's culture. The threat hung in the air like poison. Compete and embarrass yourself and we'll make sure you're not here next year. Maya thanked her for the advice and walked out with her head high. That night, Maya had a moment of doubt. She sat in her empty dorm room, looking at her mother's photo. She thought about how much easier it would be to quit, to avoid the public humiliation that everyone expected. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just a charity case pretending to be a real musician. Maybe she should accept her place and stop reaching for things that weren't meant for people like her. But then she remembered why she started playing piano in the first place. It wasn't for competitions or schools or approval from people who would never respect her anyway. It was because music was the one place where she felt completely herself, completely free. When she played, she wasn't a foster kid or a scholarship student or a poor girl in a rich school. She was just Maya, expressing something true and beautiful. Nobody could take that away from her, no matter how hard they tried. The competition was in 3 days. She was going to show up and play her heart out, and whatever happened after that would happen. At least she would know she didn't give up. The morning of the competition arrived with unexpected sunshine after days of rain. Maya woke up at 4:30, even though she didn't need to practice. Her body was used to the routine. She lay in bed for a few minutes, running through the Moonlight Sonata in her mind. Every note was there, crystal clear. She could hear it perfectly, could feel her fingers moving through the phrases. The mental practice had worked. The music was inside her, completely memorized and deeply understood. She dressed carefully in the only formal outfit she owned, a simple black dress that Mrs. Chen had bought her from a thrift store. It was clean and pressed, but obviously old. Maya looked at herself in the mirror and remembered a conversation with Professor Morrison from the week before. The professor had said that clothes don't make the musician, and that some of the greatest pianists in history had performed in borrowed suits and mended dresses. What mattered was the music. The competition was being held in Eastbrook's main auditorium, a beautiful space with velvet seats and crystal chandeliers. When Maya arrived at 7 for the 8 o'clock start time, the building was already buzzing with activity. Parents were arriving with flower bouquets and cameras. Students were warming up in practice rooms backstage. Competition volunteers were setting up refreshment tables and arranging programs on seats. Maya felt completely out of place. Victoria arrived with an entourage that included her parents, a professional photographer, and what looked like a personal makeup artist. She wore a designer gown that probably cost more than Maya had spent on everything in her entire life. Her parents immediately went to speak with Dr. Whitmore and the competition judges, laughing and shaking hands like old friends. Maya noticed Victoria's father slip something into his jacket pocket after speaking with the head judge. She tried not to think about what that might mean. The competition format was straightforward. 12 finalists would perform in random order, drawn from a hat. Each student would play one piece of their choosing, between 10 and 15 minutes long. The judges would score based on technical skill, musical interpretation, and stage presence. The winner would receive a scholarship to a prestigious summer program, a cash prize, and the honor of performing at Eastbrook's end-of-year gala in front of influential people in the music world. Maya drew position number 7. Victoria had drawn position 11, one of the last spots, which was generally considered advantageous. The audience would be most engaged near the end, and the last performers often stuck in judges' minds. But Maya didn't care about strategic advantages. She just wanted to play. She found a quiet corner backstage and closed her eyes, visualizing the performance one more time. The first 6 performers were all extremely talented. They played pieces by Chopin, Rachmaninoff, and Liszt with impressive technical precision. The audiences applauded enthusiastically after each performance. Victoria's friends from the trilogy were among them, both playing on the auditorium's beautiful Steinway grand piano. Their performances were flawless but somehow emotionless, like they were executing a series of programmed movements rather than expressing something real. When Maya's name was called, the whispers began immediately. People turned in their seats to see who she was. She heard someone say, "That's the scholarship girl who practices on the broken piano." Someone else responded, "This should be interesting." Maya walked onto the stage, her legs steady despite her racing heart. The stage lights were bright and hot. The audience was a dark mass before her, hundreds of faces she couldn't quite make out. Then she saw the piano. It was the Steinway Grand, the same beautiful instrument the other competitors had used. But something was wrong. As she got closer, she realized what had happened. Someone had sabotaged it, but in a subtle way. The bench was set at an awkward height, too low for proper posture. Several music stands were positioned around the piano, creating a cramped feeling. And worst of all, when she sat down and pressed the keys gently before beginning, she realized they had changed the instrument's regulation. The keys had been adjusted to be extremely sensitive, requiring barely any pressure to produce sound. For someone used to hammering at stuck keys on a broken piano, this would be a disaster. Maya's muscle memory was trained for her difficult instrument. On this hypersensitive piano, she would accidentally play notes too loudly, create unwanted accents, and lose all dynamic control. It was a brilliant sabotage because it was nearly invisible. The judges would just think she was a bad pianist who couldn't control her touch. Maya looked out into the audience and saw Victoria in the front row, smirking. Professor Morrison was sitting far in the back, her expression unreadable. Marcus and Aisha were there too, looking worried. The judges were checking their score sheets, waiting for her to begin. Maya had a choice. She could announce the sabotage, but she had no proof. She could withdraw, claiming she didn't feel well. Or she could play. She chose to play. But first, she made an adjustment. She stood up and calmly adjusted the bench height, taking her time despite the confused murmurs from the audience. Then she removed all the unnecessary music stands, clearing the space around the piano. Finally, she sat back down and spent a full minute testing different keys, getting a feel for the instrument's sensitivity. The audience grew restless. Dr. Whitmore looked annoyed. But Maya didn't care. She needed to understand this piano. What she realized in those 60 seconds of exploration was that this piano was actually incredible. It was capable of extraordinary sensitivity and tonal variation. The problem wasn't the instrument. It was her approach. She needed to completely change her technique in real time, to play with feather-light touches instead of the forceful style she had developed on her broken piano. It would require absolute concentration and immediate adaptation. Most pianists couldn't do this. But Maya had spent months learning to adapt to impossible situations. She placed her hands on the keys, took one deep breath, and began. The opening of the Moonlight Sonata third movement exploded into the auditorium. But something unexpected happened. Instead of fighting against the piano's sensitivity, Maya embraced it. She used the lightest possible touch, creating sounds of breathtaking delicacy. Where she had planned powerful accents, she substituted subtle shifts in tone. Where she had practiced thundering crescendos, she created building tension through tiny gradations of volume. The effect was mesmerizing. The audience, which had been restless and skeptical, fell completely silent. Even the judges leaned forward in their seats. Maya was playing the Beethoven piece in a way none of them had heard before. With a kind of desperate fragility, that perfectly matched the composer's original intent. The technical passages flew by with pristine clarity because the sensitive keys responded instantly to her newfound, delicate touch. But the real magic happened when Maya stopped thinking about technique and sabotage and competitions. About halfway through the piece, she forgot about everything except the music. She was no longer Maya Rodriguez, foster kid and scholarship student. She was just a conduit for something beautiful and true. She poured every lonely night, every disappointed hope, every moment of defiant survival into those keys. The music became a conversation between her and Beethoven, two people separated by 2 centuries, but connected by struggle and perseverance. The difficult runs and arpeggios that had intimidated other pianists became moments of pure joy in Maya's hands. The dramatic shifts in dynamics told a story of darkness and light, despair and hope. When she reached the final, thundering chords, she did something spontaneous and unplanned. Instead of the usual forceful ending, she let the last notes ring out with heartbreaking gentleness, as if the whole furious piece had been building to a moment of acceptance and peace. The final note faded into absolute silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the auditorium erupted. The audience rose to their feet as one, applauding and cheering. Professor Morrison had tears running down her face. Marcus and Aisha were screaming with joy. Even some of the judges were standing, which was extremely unusual. Maya sat at the piano stunned. She had done it. Despite everything, she had done it. Content. Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaking slightly from the adrenaline. The applause continued, wave after wave of sound washing over her. She bowed awkwardly, unused to this kind of attention. When she looked up, she saw Victoria's face in the front row. The smile was gone, replaced by something between shock and fury. Her parents looked equally stunned. Dr. Whitmore sat rigid in her seat, not clapping, her expression carefully neutral. Backstage, Maya found a quiet corner and tried to process what had just happened. Her hands were trembling. She had expected to play well, but she hadn't expected that feeling. That moment when everything else disappeared and only the music remained. Other competitors congratulated her as they passed, some genuine and some clearly forced. A few looked annoyed, realizing they would have to follow that performance. The next 4 performers did their best, but the energy in the auditorium had shifted. The audience had witnessed something special and everyone knew it. The judges whispered among themselves between performances, glancing at their notes. When Victoria's name was finally called, the tension ratcheted up even higher. Everyone wanted to see how the reigning champion would respond to being upstaged by the scholarship student. Victoria walked onto stage with complete confidence. She had prepared for this competition for months, working with private tutors and practicing on the finest instruments. Her piece was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. She had chosen just the first movement, but even that was nearly 15 minutes of virtuosic complexity. Most high school students wouldn't dare attempt it. From the first notes, it was clear that Victoria was an exceptional pianist. Her technique was flawless, her memorization perfect. She executed impossibly fast runs with machine-like precision. Her posture was textbook correct, her pedaling sophisticated. Everything about the performance demonstrated years of expensive training and natural ability. The judges nodded approvingly, marking their scores. This was exactly the kind of playing Eastbrook Academy was known for producing. But something was missing. Victoria played the notes correctly, but there was no soul behind them. It was a perfect technical demonstration, like watching an extremely advanced robot perform calculations, beautiful in its precision but empty of human emotion. Where Maya's performance had been a raw expression of lived experience, Victoria's was an exhibition of technical mastery. Both were impressive, but only one had told a story that mattered. When Victoria finished, the applause was enthusiastic but noticeably shorter than what Maya had received. Victoria smiled and bowed, but Maya could see the frustration in her eyes. She knew her performance hadn't landed the way she expected. As she walked off stage, she deliberately avoided looking at Maya. The last performer, a senior boy playing Debussy, did well but couldn't recapture the emotional peak of earlier performances. The judges deliberated for 45 minutes while the audience mingled in the lobby. Maya stayed backstage, not wanting to face the crowd. Professor Morrison found her there, sitting alone on an equipment crate. The elderly woman didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside her. Then she quietly told Maya that in 50 years of teaching, she had rarely seen a performance that brave. Not just technically brave, but emotionally honest. Marcus and Aisha burst through the backstage doors, ignoring the volunteer trying to keep audience members out. They hugged Maya, talking excitedly about how amazing she was and how everyone was talking about her performance. Other scholarship students followed, a small group of kids who understood what Maya's success meant. She wasn't just representing herself. She was representing everyone who had been told they didn't belong. When the judges finally emerged, everyone filed back into the auditorium. Dr. Whitmore took the stage to announce the results. She explained that the competition had been extremely close, and that all the performers should be proud. Maya noticed she didn't make eye contact with her during this speech. The head judge, an elderly man who taught at a prestigious conservatory, joined her on stage with the results envelope. Third place went to a junior who had played Chopin. Second place went to one of Victoria's friends from the trilogy. Maya felt her heart sink. She had done her best, but Victoria would win again. That was fine. She had proven something to herself, and that mattered more than a trophy. But then the head judge smiled and said something unexpected. He explained that the competition had been remarkable this year, with one performance that stood out for its exceptional artistry. The first place winner was Maya Rodriguez. The auditorium exploded in applause and cheers. Maya sat frozen in her seat, unable to process what she had just heard. Marcus was shaking her shoulders, shouting in excitement. Aisha was crying. Professor Morrison was standing and clapping slowly, deliberately, with a look of fierce pride on her face. Maya stood up on shaking legs and made her way to the stage. Victoria sat motionless in her seat, her face pale. Her parents were already standing to leave, clearly furious. The head judge handed Maya a trophy and a certificate for the summer program scholarship. He shook her hand and said something about how her interpretation of Beethoven was one of the most moving performances he had witnessed from a student. The photographer was taking pictures, but Maya barely noticed. She was still trying to believe this was real. Dr. Whitmore presented Maya with the cash prize envelope, her smile tight and professional. She posed for a photo with Maya, but dropped her arm the moment the camera flashed. Maya understood perfectly. The school would take credit for her success publicly while privately wishing she had lost. But that didn't matter anymore. She had won on her own terms, despite every obstacle they had thrown at her. After the ceremony, things happened quickly. Victoria and her parents left immediately without speaking to anyone. The trilogy scattered, suddenly finding excuses to be elsewhere. Other students who had ignored Maya all semester suddenly wanted to talk to her, to be associated with her success. She politely extracted herself from these conversations and found Professor Morrison, who was preparing to leave. The professor told Maya that she had been right to see potential in her all those weeks ago. She explained that Maya had something that couldn't be taught, a kind of emotional authenticity that came from genuine hardship and genuine resilience. She reminded Maya that this was just the beginning, that the path ahead would have many more obstacles. But if she kept playing with that same honesty and courage, she would go far in music. Before leaving, Professor Morrison handed Maya a business card for a friend who directed a youth orchestra in the city. She said they were always looking for talented pianists and that Maya should contact them. It wasn't charity, the professor emphasized. It was an opportunity Maya had earned through her skill and determination. She also mentioned that she would be recommending Maya for her advanced piano seminar next year, a class usually reserved for upperclassmen. That night, Maya sat alone in her dorm room, the trophy on her desk beside her mother's photo. She thought about everything that had happened, from the broken piano to the sabotaged competition instrument to the impossible performance she had somehow delivered. She realized that Victoria and the trilogy had actually done her a favor. By trying to break her, they had forced her to become stronger than she ever would have been otherwise. She picked up her phone and called Mrs. Chen, her social worker. She told her about the competition, about winning first place, about the summer program and the orchestra opportunity. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears and said how proud she was. She reminded Maya that she had always said music would be Maya's salvation, her way out of the cycle of instability. Maya had proven her right. Before going to sleep, Maya went to the music building one last time. Her old practice room was empty, the broken piano still sitting there unrepaired. She sat down at it and played a few notes, listening to the familiar sticks and discordant tones. This terrible instrument had been her teacher, forcing her to develop skills that pianists with perfect resources would never need. She patted it gently, like saying goodbye to an old friend. Walking back to the dormitory under the stars, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of a child waiting to be rescued, but the solid, earned hope of someone who had survived and succeeded despite everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Dr. Whitmore would probably make her life difficult. Victoria would find new ways to undermine her. But Maya had proven something important. She belonged here, not because someone had given her permission, but because her talent and determination had earned her place, and nobody could take that away. Content. The morning after the competition, Maya expected things to return to normal, or at least to the hostile normal she had experienced before. Instead, she woke to find her phone filled with messages. Other scholarship students congratulated her. Teachers she had never spoken to sent emails praising her performance. Even students from other schools who had attended the competition were reaching out through social media. Her performance had been recorded and was already circulating online, but the most surprising development came at breakfast. Maya entered the cafeteria expecting to eat alone as usual, but Marcus and Aisha waved her over to their table. This table was in the center of the cafeteria, not hidden in the corner. Several other scholarship students sat there too, along with a few paying students who were friendly and not part of Victoria's social circle. For the first time since arriving at Eastbrook, Maya ate breakfast surrounded by conversation and laughter. Victoria and the trilogy entered the cafeteria late, clearly expecting their usual grand entrance to turn heads. But most students were too busy talking about Maya's competition win to pay much attention. Victoria's face flushed red when she realized the social dynamic had shifted. She sat at her usual table with her two friends, but even they seemed subdued. One of them kept glancing over at Maya's table as if reconsidering her allegiances. In music theory class, the professor asked Maya to stay after everyone else left. She braced herself for criticism or some new form of punishment disguised as academic concern. Instead, the professor told her that her performance had been remarkable and asked if she would be willing to perform at the upcoming spring concert series. This was a prestigious honor, usually reserved for senior students. Maya accepted, hardly believing what was happening. Dr. Whitmore called an assembly that afternoon for all music students. Maya worried this would be a trap, some public humiliation to put her back in her place. But the headmaster surprised everyone by announcing that Eastbrook Academy had brought great honor to the school through Maya's competition win. She spoke about excellence and determination, carefully framing Maya's success as reflecting well on the institution. It was transparent and manipulative, but Maya didn't care. The public acknowledgement made it harder to undermine her privately. After the assembly, Maya returned to the music building and found something unexpected. Her practice room had been cleaned and reorganized. More importantly, her broken piano was gone. In its place sat a different upright piano, not a grand like the competition instrument, but significantly better than what she had before. It was properly tuned and every key worked perfectly. There was no note explaining the change, but Maya suspected Professor Morrison had intervened. The new piano felt strange at first. Maya's fingers kept expecting resistance that wasn't there. She had to consciously adjust her touch, relearning how to play without compensating for mechanical failures. It was like learning to walk without a limp after months of injury. But within a few days, she adapted. The music came easier now, flowing without the constant problem-solving required by the broken instrument. Victoria didn't give up easily. Unable to attack Maya's musical ability directly after the competition results, she shifted strategies. She started spreading rumors that Maya had received special accommodation during the competition, that the judges had been instructed to favor diversity over merit. She suggested that Professor Morrison had helped Maya cheat somehow, feeding her answers to music theory tests or giving her performance tips that weren't available to other students. These rumors found some traction among students whose parents valued traditional hierarchies and were uncomfortable with scholarship students succeeding. But they also backfired. Many students, including some from wealthy families, found Victoria's campaign distasteful. The head judge from the competition heard about the rumors and sent a strongly worded email to Dr. Whitmore, defending the integrity of the judging process. He specifically mentioned that Maya's performance had been the unanimous choice for first place. 3 weeks after the competition, Maya received an email that changed everything. The youth orchestra that Professor Morrison had connected her with wanted to offer her a position as featured soloist for their summer concert series. The director had watched her competition performance online and was impressed. The position came with a small stipend that would help cover living expenses. More importantly, it was a legitimate opportunity to perform professionally, something that could open doors to music conservatories and scholarships. Maya showed the email to Professor Morrison during one of their continuing morning sessions. The professor smiled and told her this was what happened when you let your work speak for itself. She reminded Maya that the classical music world was full of politics and prejudice, but exceptional talent always found a way through. She also warned Maya that success would bring new challenges and that she needed to stay focused on her development as a musician, rather than getting caught up in fame or status. The spring concert, where Maya was supposed to perform, approached quickly. She chose to play the same Moonlight Sonata third movement that had won her the competition. But with a few months of additional practice, her interpretation had deepened. She understood the piece better now, could bring out subtleties she had missed before. During rehearsals, other students stopped to listen. Even some of Victoria's former allies acknowledged that Maya was exceptionally talented. Victoria made one last attempt to sabotage Maya before the spring concert. She convinced her father to complain to Dr. Whitmore that Maya's success was creating an uncomfortable environment for other students, that the focus on one scholarship student was divisive and bad for school morale. The implication was clear. Eastbrook should put Maya back in her place or risk angering an important donor. Dr. Whitmore, ever the politician, tried to find a middle ground. The headmaster called Maya to her office and suggested very carefully that perhaps Maya might want to share the spring concert spotlight with other students. Maybe she could play a duet with Victoria, a gesture of unity and school spirit. Maya understood immediately what this was, a way to diminish her achievement by forcing her to share the stage with the person who had tried to destroy her. She politely but firmly declined, saying that she had been offered the solo performance and intended to fulfill that obligation. Dr. Whitmore's expression hardened. She reminded Maya again that scholarships were reviewed annually. Maya met her gaze steadily and said that if Eastbrook didn't want her there, she had received interest from other music academies after her competition win. It was mostly a bluff, but there had been one inquiry from a school in another state. The headmaster's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected Maya to have options or to be willing to leave. The meeting ended with an uncomfortable truce. Maya would perform her solo as planned, but Dr. Whitmore made it clear that she expected Maya to be a model student in all other ways. No controversies, no complaints, nothing that could be used against her. Maya agreed, understanding that she was walking a tightrope. She was being allowed to succeed, but only barely, and only as long as she didn't make too much noise about the obstacles that had been placed in her way. The night of the spring concert arrived with perfect weather. The auditorium was packed with students, parents, and faculty. Local music critics had even shown up after hearing about the competition winner's upcoming performance. Maya stood backstage wearing the same thrift store dress but with a new confidence. She wasn't nervous this time. She knew she could play this piece in her sleep, could perform it on any instrument in any condition. When she walked onto the stage, the audience applauded before she even sat down. She took her seat at the grand piano, adjusted the bench, and paused for a moment. She looked out at the audience and saw Professor Morrison in her usual seat in the back. Marcus and Aisha were there with a group of scholarship students who had become her friends. Even Mrs. Chen had driven 2 hours to watch. And in the front row, looking miserable, sat Victoria with her parents. Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The Moonlight Sonata poured out of her, but it was different from the competition performance. Less desperate, more assured, she had nothing left to prove, no one to defy. This was pure music, played for the joy of playing. Every note rang clear and true. The technical passages that had once intimidated her now felt like old friends. The emotional depth was still there, but tempered with a kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving challenges. Halfway through the piece, Maya realized something profound. The broken piano, the sabotage, Victoria's cruelty, all of it had been necessary. Not good, not fair, not right, but necessary. Those experiences had forced her to develop strength and adaptability she wouldn't have found otherwise. She had been refined by fire, and what emerged was something stronger and more resilient than a talent that had never been tested. When the final notes faded away, the standing ovation was even longer than at the competition. But this time Maya truly felt it. She wasn't a foster kid or a scholarship student or an outsider who had somehow snuck into a place she didn't belong. She was a pianist. A real legitimate talented pianist with a future in music. The label foster kid would always be part of her story, but it wasn't the whole story anymore. After the concert, something unexpected happened. Victoria approached Maya in the lobby where people were congratulating the performers. For a moment, Maya thought she was going to cause another scene. Instead, Victoria stood awkwardly for a few seconds, then quietly said that Maya had played beautifully. It wasn't an apology for months of cruelty, and it didn't erase anything that had happened, but it was an acknowledgement, a recognition that Maya had earned her place through undeniable talent. Maya nodded in response but didn't thank her or accept the compliment warmly. Some things couldn't be forgiven with a single moment of decency, but she also didn't feel anger anymore. Victoria had her own struggles, her own pressures from parents who expected perfection. That didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained it. Maya had spent enough of her life carrying anger. She didn't need to carry it anymore. Content. Summer arrived faster than Maya expected. The school year ended with final exams and concerts, and suddenly she was packing her few belongings for the youth orchestra program. Mrs. Chen helped her move to a small apartment near the orchestra rehearsal space, a modest place that Maya would share with 2 other young musicians. For the first time in years, she would have a stable home for an entire summer, a place that was hers without the fear of sudden displacement. The youth orchestra welcomed her warmly. The other musicians were talented students from across the region, most from middle-class families who had worked hard to afford music lessons and instruments. They treated Maya like a colleague rather than a charity case. The director, an energetic woman named Ms. Reyes, pushed everyone to their limits but with encouragement rather than cruelty. It was everything Eastbrook should have been but wasn't. Maya's role as featured soloist meant learning several concertos and performing them with full orchestra accompaniment. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Playing solo was one thing, but coordinating with 60 other musicians required different skills. She had to learn to listen while playing, to follow the conductor's tempo changes, to blend with and complement the orchestra's sound. Ms. Reyes worked with her patiently, helping her understand the collaborative nature of ensemble performance. The first public concert happened in mid-June at an outdoor venue in the city park. Hundreds of people came, spreading blankets on the grass and enjoying the evening weather. Maya performed Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 21, the famous one with the beautiful second movement. As she played, watching the sunset behind the audience, she felt complete peace. This was what music was supposed to be, shared beauty, not competition or status. After the concert, families approached Maya with congratulations. Several parents asked about her training and seemed impressed when they learned she attended Eastbrook Academy. A few people recognized her from the competition video that had circulated online. But the best moment came when a little girl, maybe 7 years old, asked shyly if Maya could teach her piano someday. Maya knelt down and told her that if she practiced hard and never gave up, she could become an amazing pianist. The girl's face lit up with possibility. Word of Maya's summer performances reached Eastbrook. Professor Morrison sent frequent emails checking on her progress and offering advice. Even Dr. Whitmore sent a brief message acknowledging that Maya was representing the school well, though the tone remained coolly professional. Some of Maya's new friends from school came to concerts when they could, creating a small cheering section. Marcus brought his whole family to one performance and they took Maya out for dinner afterward. But the summer wasn't all triumph. Maya struggled with self-doubt that surfaced in quiet moments. Years of instability and criticism had left marks that one successful competition couldn't erase. Some nights she lay awake wondering if her success was a fluke, if next year would bring failure and disappointment. She found herself reluctant to make plans beyond the immediate future, unable to trust that good things would last. Foster care had taught her that happiness was temporary. Ms. Reyes noticed Maya's struggles and had a frank conversation with her. The director shared her own story of growing up in poverty and fighting for every opportunity in a world that often dismissed young women of color in classical music. She explained that imposter syndrome was common among talented people from marginalized backgrounds, that the internal voice saying you don't deserve success was just echoing external messages absorbed over years. Learning to silence that voice took time and practice, just like learning an instrument. The conversation helped, but what helped more was the consistency of the summer program. Every day Maya showed up and played. Every day she improved. Every day she was treated with respect and encouragement. Slowly, her brain began to accept that maybe this wasn't a fluke. Maybe she really was talented. Maybe she really did deserve the opportunities coming her way. The positive experiences were creating new neural pathways to compete with the old ones formed by rejection and instability. In early July, Maya received surprising news. The competition video had been seen by a representative from Juilliard, one of the most prestigious music conservatories in the world. They were interested in her for their pre-college program, which accepted only the most exceptional young musicians. It would mean traveling to New York on weekends during the school year for intensive training. The program was expensive, but they were offering her a full scholarship. She had 3 weeks to decide. Maya's first instinct was to say no. It seemed too good to be true, and experience had taught her to be suspicious of things that seemed too good. But Professor Morrison, when Maya called her for advice, was thrilled. She explained that Juilliard's pre-college program was life-changing, that the connections and training Maya would receive could set her up for a professional career. She told Maya that opportunities like this didn't come around often, and that turning it down out of fear would be a mistake. Maya's first instinct was to say no. It seemed too good to be true, and experience had taught her to be suspicious of things that seemed too good. But Professor Morrison, when Maya called her for advice, was thrilled. She explained that Juilliard's pre-college program was life-changing, that the connections and training Maya would receive could set her up for a professional career. She told Maya that opportunities like this didn't come around often, and that turning it down out of fear would be a mistake. Mrs. Chen was equally encouraging. She helped Maya understand the logistics of traveling to New York from Eastbrook on weekends, and promised to help coordinate transportation. She reminded Maya of how far she had come already. From a scared foster kid with a broken keyboard to a young musician with opportunities at the highest levels. Mrs. Chen said that Maya's mother, wherever she was, would be proud. That thought made Maya cry, releasing emotions she had been holding in for months. The decision became clear during a late-night practice session at the orchestra's rehearsal space. Maya was working on a particularly difficult Rachmaninoff passage when she suddenly understood something. She had spent her whole life adapting to circumstances, making do with whatever broken resources were available. But maybe it was time to stop just surviving and start thriving. Maybe she deserved to reach for the best opportunities available, not just accept whatever scraps she was offered. She called Juilliard the next morning and accepted the offer. The news spread quickly. The youth orchestra celebrated with a party after rehearsal. Ms. Reyes gave a toast about Maya's incredible talent and determination. Other orchestra members shared stories about how Maya's performances had inspired them to practice harder and reach higher. Even some of the older musicians who had initially been skeptical about a high school student being featured soloist acknowledged that she had earned every accolade through undeniable skill. Back at Eastbrook, responses were more mixed. Professor Morrison was delighted and immediately began planning how to adjust their coaching sessions to prepare Maya for Juilliard's demanding program. Dr. Whitmore sent a congratulatory email that managed to be both complimentary and somewhat dismissive, noting that Eastbrook had many talented students and was pleased to have contributed to Maya's development. The underlying message was clear: don't let this success make you think you're special. Victoria's response was silence. She had left Eastbrook at the end of the school year, transferring to a different prestigious academy where presumably she wouldn't have to face constant reminders of being bested by the scholarship student. Some people said her parents had pulled her out, unable to accept that their daughter had been beaten fairly. Maya felt a complicated mix of relief and something almost like sympathy. Victoria had never learned to fail gracefully, and that would limit her more than any lack of talent. The summer program culminated in a final concert in early August. Maya performed Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5, known as the Emperor Concerto. It was a massive, complex work that required not just technical skill but deep musical maturity. Ms. Reyes had initially suggested something easier, but Maya insisted. She wanted to challenge herself, to prove that the Moonlight Sonata performance wasn't her peak but just the beginning. The performance was magnificent. Maya commanded the stage with the confidence of someone twice her age. The orchestra supported her beautifully, and the chemistry between soloist and ensemble was electric. The audience of nearly 1,000 people gave her multiple standing ovations. Local music critics wrote glowing reviews, with one calling her the most promising young pianist to emerge from the region in decades. The concert was recorded and would be used in the orchestra's promotional materials. After the final concert, Maya returned to her summer apartment and sat alone for a while, processing everything that had happened. A year ago, she had been just another foster kid with a dream that seemed impossible. Now she was heading into her sophomore year at a prestigious academy, about to start weekend training at Juilliard, with professional performance opportunities and genuine friendships. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. She called Mrs. Chen and thanked her for everything, for believing in her talent when she was just a scared kid banging on church pianos, for fighting to get her into Eastbrook despite the resistance, for being a constant source of support when everything seemed impossible. Mrs. Chen reminded Maya that she had done this herself, that all the social worker had done was open a few doors. Walking through those doors, surviving the challenges, refusing to quit, that was all Maya. The final days of summer passed in a blur of preparation. Maya practiced intensively, knowing that Juilliard would be even more demanding than Eastbrook. She shopped for warmer clothes for New York trips and studied the subway maps. She corresponded with other students in the Juilliard pre-college program, nervous but excited to meet other young musicians at her level. Everything was moving so fast, but this time it didn't feel like being swept away by forces beyond her control. It felt like momentum. On the last day before returning to Eastbrook for her sophomore year, Maya visited the music store where she used to play the display keyboards when she was younger. Before Eastbrook, when she was just a foster kid with a dream, the owner recognized her from the news coverage and congratulated her. He showed her the expensive pianos in the showroom and let her play anything she wanted. Maya sat at a gorgeous Steinway Grand, the kind she had once thought she would never touch, and played a simple melody her mother had taught her years ago. As her fingers moved across the keys, Maya realized that the broken piano at Eastbrook had been a gift in disguise. It had forced her to develop resilience, adaptability, and a deep understanding of music that went beyond just pressing the right keys. Students who had only ever played perfect instruments would never develop those skills. They would struggle when faced with imperfect conditions. While Maya knew she could adapt to anything, the obstacles meant to break her had actually made her unbreakable. The next chapter of her life was about to begin, full of new challenges and opportunities. There would be difficult days ahead, moments when she doubted herself or felt like an outsider again. But she had proven something important. Talent combined with determination could overcome almost any obstacle. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a pianist with a future, someone whose story was worth telling, and this was only the beginning.